are on the Titanic with fiat, and we should sink the Titanic as slow as possible to get everyone safe to the Bitcoin land. This makes sense because like the Titanic, if it sinks slowly, we have enough chance to actually get the people out and get them safe, and they are not wet and they're not sinking in the water. But then there's also the other theory, and it's the other kind of like thought experiment. What if fiat is an addiction, a drug addiction, and we are now saying, oh, let's take fiat still, but let's take it a little less. So it's like, oh, let's still take heroin, but let's take a little less. And as you said, maybe we have to rip off the Band-Aid. Maybe we have to just stop taking the drugs. Maybe we have to just stop taking the addiction that we are in and just get clean and get to a Bitcoin system. And also with drug addicts, like if you completely cut them, like there's usually a crash happening. Like I'm not super into this topic, but I can imagine things like that happening. So anyways, Bitcoin will do what Bitcoin will do, and we will see how it progresses. I just think if Bitcoin goes up too quickly, and then in the same time fiat goes down too fast, there might be bad things happening along the way. But either way, we will come to a nice Bitcoin land. So I just don't think like the slower it goes, like for me, it's the better. But I'm not certain about that. If we see fiat as the poison, maybe we have to get the poison out of the system faster. I'm not fully sure on that.
So I look at the United States government. Maybe this is where I was going with it. The United States government is embracing Bitcoin. And a lot of governments are looking at Bitcoin, and Bitcoin, from my perspective, is discovered and utilized to separate money from state. But what if the state, and my good friend Paul Tarantino talks about this, what if the state kind of mapped out and gamed out their debt problem with fiat and came up with the answer? And the answer is you need a heat sink like Bitcoin, like gold, like oil. So I'm also reading Mark Goodwin's book, The Bitcoin Dollar, and I'm trying to understand this. If you can yoke the dollar to one of these asset classes, like gold originally, and then oil, and you always keep medium exchange out of it, and you keep unit of account out of it. So you don't care if the dollar store value. You just need it to be a medium exchange. It means you need to buy, if you want to buy that thing, you have to use dollars. And you want to keep unit of account. So if you want to measure that thing, you measure it in dollars. And therefore, then the wealth in the world stays in dollars. Everything is measured in dollars. And I think this is what Jeff Booth talks about. So Bitcoin fails as a medium exchange. It fails like gold failed. So I think that's why, and again, I look at, Bitcoin is built utilizing SHA-256 technology, which is CIA government technology, and they're embracing it now. And if the way they're embracing it though is by herding it all together and ghettoizing it, so making it a stagnant asset, sort of like a pet rock. And if that thing grows in value, they can sell dollars and have everything measured in dollars. So they could sell treasuries to the stablecoins. If you want to buy the thing, you got to buy the stablecoin. And then, so you want to buy the stablecoin, they got to buy US treasuries. And you have this beautiful mechanism. You actually build a floor into the dollar, because anytime the stablecoin breaks peg and goes below, there'll be large institutions and pools of capital that want to buy dollars for less than the price of a dollar. And then you have a valuable dollar if it breaks the peg above. Now you could buy more than a dollar for a dollar. So I think that's sort of the end game, or the way to extend the life of the dollar is the government's going to look to use Bitcoin as a heat sink, the way they used. And so you had the petrodollar, right? After we broke the peg with gold, we had the petrodollar. If you wanted to buy the oil and use energy in the world, you had to go with dollars. Even if both parties didn't trade in dollars in their home currency, they have native currencies. They had to use dollars as an intermediary to buy oil. and oil is priced in dollars. And, so I think a lot about that convergence. And alongside the Bitcoin treasuries companies, which is a centralizing force, and sort of the lack of interest in sort of the other qualities of Bitcoin.
It's super interesting. And I'm big on there's like the Bitcoin system and the fiat system, and you can hold Bitcoin in the fiat system. And if I do not hope that for anyone, but it's a possibility that if you hold Bitcoin in the fiat system, which an ETF is, or like in a treasury company, or like on exchange even, you might end up with zero Bitcoin. Like I do not hope that for anyone. Like I do hope that your IOU is actually holding up and you get your Bitcoin at some point in kind. But it's just a reality that those are not really your Bitcoin, and they're in the fiat system, and you might end up with zero Bitcoin because it's just a piece of paper that you in the end have. That's why, as long as we can push self-custody and maybe even like spending a Bitcoin and kind of trying to have more and more Bitcoin ecosystems and full node operators and all those things out there, I think as long as we have that, we are good, and only individuals that hold it in the fiat system will suffer from that.
Yeah, I think about this a lot too, and I've sort of mixed feelings. On one hand, you have to have your Bitcoin in self custody to get the qualities and the good stuff from Bitcoin, but you become your own counterparty risk to yourself and to anyone else in your life that you want to inherit your Bitcoin or get access to your Bitcoin in case anything happened to you. But for thousands of years or hundreds of years, people have trusted institutions with their wealth. You've never been able to like take full self-custody of this kind of wealth before. I mean, and you think about how like why necklaces were created, so that you didn't hide your money under a mattress. You put your shells on your neck. So if someone wants to steal your money in the middle of the night, they had to wake you up to take it off your neck. It wasn't to show off the money; it was to protect the money, to keep it on you, to have self-custody of your shells. But at some point, you look at rye stones, and the biggest rye stones in the village were kept in the middle of the village because it was an honest, transparent ledger. People knew who worked or owned that particular stone. And even if you stole it, the idea of the value behind the stone and who it should accrue to was still in everyone's ledger because it was a small enough economy where they could kind of keep track of those things. But trust is in the system. And my guess is if Bitcoin overtakes the entire economy and becomes all three things, store of value, medium exchange, and unit of account, I do think a lot of people and institutions and entities would probably have not take self-custody of their Bitcoin. And I don't think that would be the worst thing in the world. I think a lot of people would look at it and say, hey, how much of my stack do I have to have in self-custody for various reasons? And what rights and access do I have to have to the other part of the stack to move it into my getaway stack if I needed to change my threat vector? Right? Like Joe Rogan doesn't keep all his wealth at his crib. He's a very wealthy person. People know he's wealthy. Even though he doesn't keep it there, he still hires bodyguards, probably in security. I mean, like everyone has to look at their own threat vector. Like I was talking to David Collum last night, and he's like, he would be scared of a wrench attack, and he doesn't understand maybe multi-sig and different ways to secure your Bitcoin. But I think if he owned a Bitcoin, I don't think he'd have a problem if he kept it at fidelity, and for him avoided his biggest nightmare, someone coming to his home and trying to take his Bitcoin, or any of his wealth. So I think that will evolve too. And I think the way you self-custody will probably evolve over time. I mean, it's a very nascent technology in that respect, all of this. So in how we look at it, how we interact with it. I mean, like corporations, I mean, they're going to have to really look at how they hold it. Do you have 3 people who have, 5 people who have keys and 3 of them can move the coins? Do you have 9 people? Do you have 17? Like, how do you figure this out? Do you keep it at 3 different custodians and have only certain people who can call the custodian? I mean, how do countries then, buy and store Bitcoin? And that's another thing. I think, a lot of people think the U.S. is going to buy Bitcoin, and I really don't. I don't think the United States government is interested in buying something and never selling it. I don't think they have, like, you'd have to buy Bitcoin and sell it to actually capture gains for, like, I just don't see the United States government or really a lot of governments looking to do that in the near term, especially killing the notion of their own golden goose. The United States government gets to issue $100 bills that cost them 7 cents to produce, right? And like, think about like a supermarket that's operating at like 1 to 2% profit margins. I mean, they're operating at over 99% operating margin or profit margin on their goods. They're not going to let anyone mess with that business.
But maybe they need Bitcoin to prolong this business.
They totally do. They need, if Bitcoin goes up in value, stablecoins have to buy more U.S. treasuries. And when a stable coin is issued, the United States government gets a 2-for-1. So they issue the stable coin, that's $1, and the stable coin has to go buy a U.S. treasury, which is a second dollar to back the first dollar. So $1 bought, $2 sold. So it's a great business. And I think that's part of the reason the price of Bitcoin is, through whether it's nefarious or, just, again, I think there's a lot of parties involved that are moving a lot of Bitcoin through regulated markets. And I think those parties have an opportunity to work together to push price in different directions, whether it's to burn short sellers or to liquidate longs or, but whatever it might be. I mean, we've seen a lot of manipulation in gold markets. So I think the United States government is trying to roll out the Genius Act and the Big Beautiful Bill and all the regulatory clarity on stablecoins and onshore as much stablecoins as possible to sell U.S. treasuries, and then let the price of Bitcoin potentially rip, or at least step ladder up a lot more and issue more treasuries behind all those stablecoins.
I see like the same was gold and paper bills were now Bitcoin and stable coins. So it's like almost a Bretton Woods 2.0 where the US is already saying like we want Bitcoin to flourish in America and we will give the rest of the world stable coins. It's a genius thing to do.
It's monetary colonialism. I mean, those US dollar stable coins, whatever you want to call them, I think we should call them digital political currency units. But those things will get into markets that the dollar has never been able to get into, like Iran and China and Russia, and it'll help bring and that will be a step ladder improvement for all the economies around the world who are on a crappier coin than the dollar. And I think that's where you see stable coins as a bridge to Bitcoin or an on-ramp. But I think it extends the life of the dollar because it brings that's a much better unit of account for a lot of economies. It's a slower death for a lot of people around the world to be on the dollar than it is to be on their local currency. And
I mean, if you look at Turkey and all those, like if you have like a inflation rate of like 100 or over 100% a year like that, like it's not US dollar is almost like a Bitcoin at that point.
Right. And if you look at Bitcoin treasury companies, I mean, these are right now the companies coming to this strategy are failing companies. Metaplanet, they can't get people, COVID destroyed their hotel business. So how do we change it up? What can we do? We could become a Bitcoin treasury company, right? And that has a lot of exterior or external qualities too, beyond just you're tethering yourself to the Bitcoin price. You get great marketing, you get sort of community support, all these different things. But it's been struggling and failing companies that have come to this game plan first. And the companies that will come last are your most successful companies. They have the least incentive to change what they're doing. And so it's going to be countries that have, that the dollar has taken over their local currency and they don't have a local currency or they have a failing currency. And these will be the countries that turn to Bitcoin first, like a la El Salvador, right? They didn't have their own currency. They were already dollarized. So they have the least skin in the game in keeping their own currency, so they can move to the, sort of try to experiment with Bitcoin. And so I think you'll see tiny failing countries try Bitcoin first. And that would be exciting. I would love to see some countries that, really turn everything around for their citizens by jumping on the Bitcoin bandwagon, right? And moving to a Bitcoin standard. I'd love to see a company continue to thrive like what we've seen with El Salvador in a short period of time. And that story remains to be written, but it'll be amazing to see a country rise to the cream of the crop through a Bitcoin standard. But it'll be countries without their own currency, I think, first, or failing currencies.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. That's why I was so surprised to see president of the United States talking about Bitcoin, being at Bitcoin conferences, being openly about, oh, maybe we buy some, maybe we do this and that. Like just the presence of him at a Bitcoin conference, that honestly surprised me. That it felt so out of place. Like it felt like this should happen in 2035 or 2030 or something like that. For me, also El Salvador felt out of place. Like El Salvador happened way earlier than I thought it will happen. Like I came into Bitcoin in 2020 and had my theories of if Bitcoin is successful, how it will go. And I completely underestimated the developments on a nation side of things. I overestimated how quick it will go with companies. Like I thought we have like 100, 200 companies within like 2022, but we're not even at 200 publicly traded companies yet. So it's interesting how countries are already doing that. Like it feels unreal for me.
I put on my tinfoil hat and I wonder if, El Salvador is like a CIA project to test out in a small economy what putting it on Bitcoin standard would look like. And also sort of aligning Bitcoin with sort of a more, people look at things with broad strokes, and it's not that, you could say El Salvador is not a democratic country anymore. And I don't think democracy is necessarily the best thing humanity will ever come up with, but, that's a double-edged sword, right? And I think that, I don't think Trump is an outsider. I do think his family got debanked, maybe, but I don't think that they're outside the establishment. He was a prior president already. And I think he was installed to roll out the digital surveillance network. And I think that starts with, paving the way for stable coins. And notice how they put a really broad net on crypto and sort of, and they've sort of sanctioned all like Ripple and ETH are now like sort of legal securities, or just kind of gotten backdoored around the Howey test. And all these things should, I hate government intervention, but I do think, we're going to have a government, they should be intervening in predatory behavior. And I think a lot of these things have been predatory, and not in good faith, and not, and are kind of registered securities. So, or not unregistered securities. So, why is Trump bear hugging Bitcoin? Why were, I think it was great that we had politicians come speak to us, but it felt more like we were at a certain politician's rally rather than they were asked to come and present their ideas to us for us to think through their ideas. And I think we might have got a lot of short-term gains, and I use we very loosely here. There is no real Bitcoin community, but if there is a movement, we really tethered our movement to one political party. And, I think both political parties are used to divide and conquer us. So you could see, what if the Republican Party loses the midterm elections? And then, the other party wants to do a whole bunch of, they want to repeal a lot of EOs and laws and new regulation. I mean, what if we get a different, a president from a different party in 3 years? A lot can change. A lot of the things that Trump has done that have been positive for Bitcoin have been done through EO, not through sort of the voting process and, through more mainstream legislation. So those things can change in the headwinds, and you could see how Bitcoin could be a political football, years from now, in the United States government, and that this could, Humans have been FOMOing in and out of Bitcoin for 16 years now. So you could see how, what if we did go up to like, $1 million by April of next year? And then, things change in the political environment and there's, recession and Bitcoin goes back down to 42K or 47K and if Bitcoin were to go below 69K, I think that would really, put a wrinkle in the narrative of always having higher lows. So it's interesting how how the hand has been played. I would have liked to have seen the Bitcoin community just continue to be sort of like the orange party, and you can come and bend the knee, tell us what you'll do for us, but like we're not necessarily gonna long term put ourselves blindly behind a candidate or a party, or just appeal to one side and not the other. And it's made it a very, with Trump and the meme coins that he launched and some of that bullshit. And, it really hasn't, in 2025, outside the Bitcoin bubble, you still go to like something like family barbecues or Thanksgiving, and there's a lot of people on the left or from the Democratic, whatever you want to call it, like who hear about Bitcoin and are just annoyed right away, or have bias against Bitcoiners because of their association with some of these things. So, it'll be interesting to see how that goes and whether, short-term gains lead to long-term pain there.
Yeah, the association is interesting because people, and I see it in the mainstream media all the time, Bitcoin rised partly because of Trump, and that's the only reason they always mention. Like, I don't know how it is in America, but in the Austrian mainstream news cycle, that's when they represent Bitcoin and they show how Bitcoin was rising. They always say, yeah, because Trump is in office and he's a Bitcoiner, that's why Bitcoin is now on the rise. I don't know. Like there's some truth in that, but you let a lot of truth out. Like
that doesn't
you
discuss fiat and inflation and any of these things that are truly driving the network effects of Bitcoin. And it turns people off and it helps them sort of, I forget just push it aside and the pass based on, kill the messenger type stuff.
I also find it interesting how in the EU, they are very open and pushing forward the CBDC. And in America, it's a topic where you're like, there's no CBDC. But at the same time, we have stable coins. And I'm like, maybe the stable coins are just the CBDCs of America with a different label on them. Like they can be controlled, they're digital. Like what's the difference to a CBDC?
Yeah, this is where I think you really get into the debate over definitions around, how involved the central bank is with the coin. But I think of things like PayPal already as like a CBDC, right? They could turn me on, they could turn me off. They can, go fund me. They could take all the money away from the Canadian truckers. They could turn your bank account on and off, and they can do this at the individual level, and they could do this at the zip code level. And it's just in the United States, it's just masked behind a private-public partnership. So the government doesn't track every word you say. Palantir does. The government didn't turn off your money. Bank of America did. But under whose orders and direction? And I think that's, it's just crazy to me how much, people want to think that Trump and Musk were outsiders and they were just able to buy Twitter and become president of the United States. And then like Musk is not even a United States citizen. And he's like heading up Doge and access to every computer system in the government. And him and Thiel go back to PayPal. And if you look at the PayPal mafia, every product they've come out with since PayPal, which was trying to basically be a private Bitcoin, was trying to be a private money. PayPal originally was trying to be a currency. And then they just became rails. To tell me Musk doesn't understand currency is crazy, considering how far back he goes with this thing. And I think his goal with X is to turn it into like a WeChat, where you do everything from book your dentist appointment to pay for the dentist bill, which is just a CBDC right there. When he partners with the government, and every business Musk is in is subsidized by the United States government, from satellites to, oh man, I'm blanking here, but like, to Tesla, and like people want to say, Musk is a smart guy, and like Tesla's like the stupidest idea ever, the electric cars. I mean, but anyway, I digress. But I think Trump's been installed to sort of roll out all these things and get people to digest it. I think Biden was put in to like go crazy with the inflation because the right would never accept that at first, and then, but they would never accept sort of the infringement on digital rights under a Biden administration. It was the same way like Trump. It was great to roll out COVID and the pandemic during Trump, because the right would have revolted if the left did that. But if it came from the right, it kind of got through a lot easier. So I don't know. I think that's the thing. Like, I think that Bitcoiners are not really thinking about like any threats anymore. Like it almost seems like Bitcoin is like, hey, we won. The state's going to pump our bags. Bitcoin companies are going to, pump the price, and we're here. We're in Valhalla. And, Bitcoin was built to be anti-fragile, which means that it's going to get tested over and over, and the tests are going to get bigger and bigger. So I would only imagine something's coming we just can't even imagine or envision that's going to test Bitcoin in a very different way than ever before.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.